Hi there. It's me, Stacey Sanderson, and I wanted to take some time to come back and revisit this concept of a narcissistic family system. So I had started this and then unfortunately got sick with a cold, so I had to pause it. And now I'm back where I don't look and sound terrible. So why is it important to consider what is meant by a narcissistic family system? I think it's important because within those systems, within those families, are patterns that repeat in other places in life. So workplaces can mirror narcissistic family systems. And why do we use the term system? Right? So if we think about an ecosystem like a pond, there are various different components happening organically within a pond where each part is feeding another, right? One part of that ecosystem is meeting the needs of the other, and the same is true in a family, right? So when we talk about a narcissistic family system, what we're first considering is are everyone's needs being met? Well, I think we know the answer to this because we have the narcissist in the middle and everyone revolving around that, as opposed to, like the various different ways that everyone's needs are met. So again, in that narcissistic family system, then everyone revolves around and everything revolves around the needs of that narcissist. So I heard a story the other day about, a parent who just didn't come home when they were supposed to come home, right? They didn't want to be in that parental role. And so there are some unique characteristics of these family systems, and there are some that are pretty predictable. And it all depends on the severity of either the narcissist or perhaps it's both parents, right? And we don't need to gender this necessarily. I probably will at some particular points. So the first thing to consider is the pathology of the person who is character disordered, right? The lack of empathy, being able to understand anyone else's needs, the grandiosity, the need to be the center of attention, the dramas that play out around that. It is very important, typically, to narcissists that their families make them look good and that they look good to the outside world. This whole thing exists on a continuum, from what I typically characterize as that hockey parent or dance parent to a parent that is frankly sexually, physically, emotionally abusive. This is completely on a range, on a continuum. If you had an experience of being at the end of that continuum, my heart goes out to you. If you had an experience at the beginning of that continuum, we're all sisters and brothers here, right? So either way, the driving motivation within that family is coming from the ego needs of the narcissist. So I know there's a cliche that everything has to be perfect or that the house has to be perfect, for example, the family home. That could be true, but it may also be that that family home is neglected. It really can go either way. In both cases, the environments are not conducive to being nurturing. So I know the cliche is that sort of sleeping with the enemy kind of picture, meaning the movie Sleeping with the Enemy, but it might not be that way. It could be that the house is in states of neglect and disrepair. The reason I'm saying that is most narcissists don't like performing menial household tasks, right? Many of you may know that. They don't like taking the garbage out. They don't like cleaning the toilets, those kinds of things. So that's one of the reasons why things can fall into that state of neglect and disrepair. So again, narcissistic families, very different depending on the continuum of severity of the character pathology, and the actual family home can look a variety of different ways, right? Within a narcissistic family system, typically those family members are assigned roles, and those roles are based on a few things. It starts, I believe, with children, with how much they interfere with or don't interfere with the narcissist's life. So I think that good babies are favored. Um, but it also then goes on to have something to do with temperament, right? So if you have a child who's a bit more combative or oppositional or ask questions, the narcissist will, not always consciously, reject that child and perhaps pay attention to another one. So we're starting to talk about who is the golden child, who is the scapegoat, who is the clown, the lost child. There's a myriad of different roles, and you can be assigned a role and it can change. I don't think it's always static, although it typically is. So golden children, in many ways, are on the receiving end of a level of emotional incest from the narcissist. I know those words are uncomfortable, but golden children are often being groomed to meet the ego and narcissistic supply needs of the parent. Just think about that for a moment. It's not the ideal. Golden children are the idealized projection of the narcissist's ego self. Golden children may also, that's kind of creepy, golden children may also represent that idea of idealized love that narcissists have. So, what's the easiest way to get that, right? From an innocent infant and child. So, that trajectory can change as a child gets older. And I think there's typically an attachment breach if you have a narcissistic parent sometime around the age of 8 or 9 or 10. So when kids start to individuate a little bit and they develop their own identities, there's something in that that's about that rather that's uncomfortable for the narcissist. And they consciously or not reject that child. I have talked to hundreds of people who have described that experience. So, just to reiterate, we're talking about a family system. We're talking about how that system operates. Ideally, family systems operate to allow for a child to have a healthy ego identity and individuate, become their own person, and have sovereignty and power in their own right. This does not happen in these family systems, and it doesn't matter what role you play. I think that scapegoats have it a little bit easier in terms of their own personal power and sovereignty, right? So scapegoats serve different purposes. Scapegoats typically take the blame for everything that's going on in the family. Scapegoats tend to be truth tellers. Scapegoats can be the scapegoats can be the container, rather, for the parts of themselves that the narcissist project out and the parts that they don't like. So a common example of this is if you as a child remind your parent of someone they didn't like a sibling or your father or mother, they can reject you. I don't think that's always conscious, or if you don't do what they want or meet that need for narcissistic supply, right? So one of the fundamental things to remember is narcissists do not fully individuate. If we think about, the typical psychological stages of development, they do not make it through all of them. And so typically, I think they get stuck around that age of 8 or 9. I know a lot of people think it's earlier, and that could be true. But wherever the narcissist is stuck developmentally is where there's going to be conflict with a child. So this, of course, influences how that child gets their needs met. So a child does not have the opportunity to form a healthy individuated identity, and it becomes very enmeshed, if you will, with the parent. I think that's even true for scapegoats. Scapegoats go on to have fears of authority or opposition against authority. I know I'm both have both of those things sometimes. Scapegoats have a strong internalized sense of blame. Scapegoats have strong internalized visibility fears, meaning they don't like to be seen in public or have a public image. They don't like to be in front of audiences sometimes. Scapegoats struggle in their adult relationships with codependency sometimes. And scapegoats can also struggle with boundaries, being, giving, people pleasing, right? This can also be true for golden children. Scapegoats tend to be more of those children who develop highly empathic traits as a survival mechanism, as they're reading the room, trying to figure out what's going on with the parent, and trying to anticipate what they need to do. Golden children don't tend to develop that in quite the same way. Golden children can be more entitled, but they also can lack their own sense of identity, and their sense of self-worth is inextricably interwoven with that of the parent, right? The lost child has tends to be a little bit more, have more in common with the scapegoat. Although they tend to then go on to repeat, not being visible and getting their needs met in their adult relationships. Not a competition. Each of those roles carries its own unique pain point and wound, I think. Not all golden children become narcissists, and I have met people who are narcissistic who were very much the scapegoats in their family. So it's not quite what you might think it is all the time, right? So we have to consider that narcissism develops when the ego part of the self does not fully transcend or move into other forms of identity. And so there's an aspect of people becoming more of their ego, and that is a defense mechanism against great hurt and harm. And it is this core wound that then goes on to influence everything in the narcissist's life. So these are intergenerational patterns influenced by culture and society at large, influenced by, I believe, at times how isolated people are in their families, influenced by industrialization as we move out of being in farming communities, and influenced by cultures that celebrate individualism. Although I'll tell you, I hear a lot about narcissistic parents in more collective cultures as well. So I can, at a later time, come back and speak a little bit more specifically about the role of the scapegoat and the golden child, and I will do that. And coming up in a little while, I will be interviewing my friend and colleague, Brenda Whiteman, and we're going to be talking about character development. So the influence of attachment on character development. The other thing coming up is I'd like to talk about when your child is narcissistic or has character pathology. And what naturally goes along with that, of course, is estrangement. So I will endeavor to keep this as organized as I can, but this is just a preliminary explanation of these family systems. So please comment, get engaged, get in the conversation, and I look I look forward to connecting with you at a later time. And also let me know if you have any questions.